Harvard stands by anti-Semitism. It stands by tribal power. Harvard stands by its president, Claudine Gay. With the support of the Harvard Alumni Association, the Black Student Union, almost every professor at Harvard, and the current student body, Claudine Gay has been retained as the president at Harvard. This after her horrific performance in front of Congress that led to the resignation of the University of Pennsylvania's president, Liz McGill. What Harvard has said here is, in essence, something that we have always known in the short and the long term as people. In the short term, it is not hypocrisy. It is hierarchy. The double standard is the point. But understanding that it is hierarchy and not hypocrisy is only part of the understanding. What Harvard has reinforced is that as much as we dress up everything, the nature of man, into words and principles and laws, it often is, and more often than not, resorts back to just tribal power and violence. Here's what I mean. You ever notice that words over time seem to have become more and more vague, less specific? During Thanksgiving, we were all sitting around one night, and somebody said, adults, that's stupid. And another adult, and there was like 30 people at our Thanksgiving, said, we don't use the S word. Now, this adult has children, young children. But weirdly, the children weren't in the room. And it did deserve some clarification. What's the S word? Stupid. We don't use stupid. It's interesting how we start to put words out of bounds. I was talking about this with a friend of mine over breakfast. Think about just that. Words we've used to describe stupid, mental incapability, slow. Almost every word that has become a pejorative, a slur, started out not just acceptable, but clinical. Like moron was a clinical term. I believe idiot was a medical term. Now these are insults. They're derogatory. Obviously, retarded has become a word that went from an accurate description of a situation to a playground insult to I'm probably making a few people listening there going, whoa, did he just say that? Or am I now supposed to say the R word? So that you have to guess at my meaning? And that's the whole point. We are losing, because of a movement away from specificity into vagueness, meaning in words. And if you lose meaning in words, you reduce people to grunts and power and violence. It doesn't stop at the R word, right? Slow. Also, a little bit of a record scratch. He's slow? No. We moved to special needs, but I was told actually special needs within the community is we're now walking away from special needs. Now we're using terms like learning differences. Well, what is the difference? He's slower than everyone else. We don't know what anybody means anymore. Learning differences, what? Like auditory versus visual? We're moving not just in an attempt to, theoretically and on its face be more empathetic and kind, but we're moving towards this incapability of understanding. And it leads us only in one direction. Like, you have thoughts and you have feelings. And if you can't translate that into words that other people understand, then we're like apes. We grunt at one another. We bark. That's how my dog communicates to other dogs on the street. And the more these words get blurry, what does one mean? And we just put more in words. You ever notice, like, I had a friend say to me, hey, Will, did you get any pushback for using the analogy of the totem pole in the last episode when you talked about, the hierarchy of victimhood at places like Penn and Harvard? And I said, well, why would I get pushback? What's wrong with totem pole? Cultural appropriation? What am I supposed to say? You know? I joke about this with Rachel Campos stuff. You ever notice how many people think the word Mexican is pejorative? Mexican is a nationality. You know? But whoa, hey. I mean, why isn't... If you think that someone should find some term softer than Mexican to describe somebody from Mexico, explain to me why you're not reaching and searching for a softer term than Canadian to describe somebody from Canada. This is like the whole tennis guerrilla warfare moment, right? If you heard that tennis announcer describe a sports tactic as guerrilla warfare, and you thought because it was Venus Williams it was racist, I think you've told me more about your deep, dark inner thoughts than the Guerilla version of guerrilla tactics. What do you mean there's two versions of that word? You can't ever use that other word around a black person. Why? What's the connection? But for the deep, dirty thought in your mind. But because we have to live in this world of guessing each other's feelings, we continue to put more words outside the bounds. Before we know it, we have no words of specificity to communicate. We're just left with dragging our knuckles, banging some rocks together, some hoops and hollers and guts and grunts. And we're left not just with the inability to understand, but we're left with the loss of communication, the base elements of tribal power, violence. Okay, let me tie this back to Harvard. You know, the mark of civilization is the ability to communicate, one of them. It is to develop self-interest over the long term, self-sacrifice over the short term principles, like free speech. Like, I hate what you have to say, but I will defend to the death your right to say it. That's a principle that gets beyond my base level instincts and emotions. Or processes, like due process. You have to go through these processes to ensure justice. Otherwise, I'd like to just take the child molester out back and end this. For example, right now in Iowa, there is, at Christmas, in the state capitol, a shrine to Satan. I'm serious. I'm dead serious right now. There's a shrine to Satan at the Iowa State Capitol. Why? Well, because of the principle of freedom of religion. Apparently the satanic, whatever boys club of Iowa filled out the right paperwork, ran through the right permits, set up this satanic, it's got candles, it's got a goat head, it's got a red cloak, and under the banner of principles like, the First Amendment, protection of religious freedom, in stands this. Now, I don't know. Is that what our founders envisioned with the First Amendment? Maybe. But, do I think that it would be righteous if I were the governor of Iowa, I would go in, I'm telling you, and I'd tear that damn thing down with my own hands. I'd tip it over, and I'd do away with the due process, and I'd want to do that. And you know why? Because I'd be in the right, and that's tribal power, and I don't want to explain myself, okay? It's self-evident. I'm taking down your satanic memorial shrine inside the state capitol. But we have these things so that we don't elect the most benevolent. We're not forced into a situation where we're always having to elect the most benevolent dictator, or we don't have these knuckle-dragging violent fights for tribal power. But that's exactly where we're headed and what's being preached and taught at Harvard. By rehiring or neglecting to fire, by retaining Claudine Gay, what they're doing is saying there is a double standard. Back to the totem pole. The victim can say anything about the oppressor, but the oppressor's speech can be censored if it hurts the victim. In fact, it's worse than that. The oppressor's words are literal violence to the victim. You've heard that. Threatens my safety. Words can be violence. But in reverse, literal violence from the victim is protected under speech against the oppressor. This is why you see them equivocating about what happened on October 7th in Israel, because they perceive the victim to be the Palestinian and his actions justifiable. So you've got your totem pole, you've got your tribal alliances, you've got your fights for power, you've got your inability to communicate because it's not necessary. We've dressed society up in these principles, but they are often one way. And what Harvard has now re-illustrated and rededicated itself to is the idea that it does not stand for principles. It's not for free speech. That's absurd on its face. We know that about Harvard. It's not for processes. I think their mantra was veritas, truth. All the things that our founders put such effort into. It's not for those. It's not for due process. It's for tribal power communicated through grunts, perceived and understood only through the prism of winning. And Harvard says we win. Now, this is where I think they're wrong. Keep trying that. Keep pushing us towards this inevitable violence, this tribal dynamic, this fight for power. And you will find out when it comes to brute force where actual power rests in the United States of America. Might want to redouble our efforts to dedication to processes and principles as we see regression at places like Harvard. That's going to do it for me today here on the Will Cain podcast. I will see you again next time. Hey, it's Will Cain. Click here to subscribe to the Fox News channel on YouTube. It's the best way to get our latest interviews and highlights. And click to subscribe to the Will Cain podcast for full episodes right now.